chapter 11, section 2. Um, Another thing the Greeks were big into studying was science. Um, the Greeks are going to put um, a lot of importance on intellect, which is the ability to learn and to reason. And they believed intellect should be used at its fullest. You should question everything. You should study the laws of nature. Philosophia is the loving of wisdom. Wisdom. You know, Philosophers were people who searched for knowledge and wisdom. One of the big names in the philosopher world is going to be um, Socrates. He was an ancient Athenian philosopher. He thought people could discover truth if they knew how to think, and he's going to spend his time searching for the truth. He would walk around Athens asking people questions. And from this, we get this idea of the Socratic method, where you ask questions to reach a conclusion. Some people were very happy that Socrates was teaching people how to think, but there were other people that viewed him as dangerous. Asking all these questions could point out a person's mistakes. He was accused of denying the gods, corrupting the young, trying to overthrow the government. And in 399 BC, he's actually put on trial. And there's going to be a jury of 500 citizens. And he spoke the truth in trying to defend himself. And he said he wouldn't change his views even to save himself. And he was found guilty and sentenced to death. And so his death sentence was he had to drink poisonous hemlock juice. And there is an artist rendition from the Renaissance of the death of Socrates. Athens later on goes on to regret their decision, and they wish they wouldn't have ruled this. And you start to see statues of Socrates being put up all over Athens. Next, you have Plato. Plato was an Athenian aristocrat. He was actually a student of Socrates, and he would write down the speeches of Socrates. Socrates never wrote anything himself. Plato wrote down and recorded those speeches of Socrates. Plato was about 30 years old when Socrates died. He's going to leave Greece when Socrates dies. He travels to Egypt and to Italy for about 12 years, eventually returning back to Athens, and he set up a school in a sacred grove of Academus. Plato trained government leaders there. He called his school there the Academy. And he's going to teach there for 40 years. And the Academy doesn't go away when Plato dies. It lasted 900 years after Plato's death. The Academy was still teaching. Plato's views were really opposite of Athens. He thought political liberty was disorder. He thought only the wise and the good should be ruling. And he's going to write a book called The Republic. And it was Plato's ideas about what the ideal state would be. It was the first ever book written on political science, which is the study of government. And he's going to examine different kinds of governments. And he explained how to avoid political errors in his book. He also wrote the dialogues. It was a book that showed how difficult it was to discover the truth. So it contains a series of discussions or dialogues talking about truth and loyalty. Aristotle. Aristotle is a pupil or student of Plato. Aristotle came to the academy at the age of 17 to study, and he stayed there until he was 37. And before Aristotle dies in 332 BC, he had written over 200 books and founded his own school. Aristotle is the first to begin to classify animals and plants into groups. And actually, with very few modifications, we still use his system today on classification of plants and animals. He added to an earlier Greek scientist, Thales of Miletus. Thales of Miletus had first developed a two-step scientific method. You're in science class, you've heard of scientific method. It's a process used by scientists to study something. And so Thales, he had the first two steps, collect the information and then form a hypothesis and a possible explanation, an educated guess to what it's going to be. Aristotle adds the third step, test the hypothesis to see if it's correct. Aristotle is also going to contribute in the area of logic, or the science of reasoning. And he develops something called soliloquism, which is reasoning that use three related statements. And the third statement is based on the first two. For example, Athenians are Greek. Socrates is an Athenian. Therefore, based on the first two, therefore, Socrates is Greek. So the Greeks were always looking to add to their knowledge. They did so without telescopes, without microscopes. They didn't have scales for really small amounts. They began discovering that natural events, they weren't necessarily caused by a god's behavior. People can learn and understand the natural laws that govern the world. Back to Thales of Miletus. As we mentioned already, he discovered the first two steps of scientific method. He also correctly predicted a solar eclipse, an eclipse of the sun in 585 BC. And a name that I'm sure a lot of people have heard is Hippocrates. He is the father of scientific medicine. He traveled around Greece, diagnosing the sick, curing people. He believed disease had natural causes. Other doctors of this time period, they thought evil spirits caused illness and stuff like that. He believed there's natural causes. And he made a list of rules of how doctors should use their skills to help patients. Maybe you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath. Doctors all over the world still take this oath, this Hippocratic Oath. Honor teachers, do their best for the sick, never give poison, keep the secrets of patients. And all this came from the ancient Greeks with Hippocrates.